If asked, would you say you are voluntarily interdependent or codependent with others in your life? Can you choose who you work with or serve? And how clear are you about what you truly want? Let's take a look together. This is prosperity and something greater. My guest today is Dave Fries. Dave is a trust, estate, and wealth preservation attorney, and he practices in southeastern Pennsylvania. He has appeared on National Public Radio. He runs his own coaching program, which he calls Business Black Ops. And you'll see why as we go through the session today. Dave is an entrepreneur at heart. He's a world traveler, and he is quite simply one of the most engaging and interesting people I have ever met. Publisher Steve Forbes has called Dave the Grandmaster of Communication. Dave and I share the Top Practices Mindset call together each month, which is an hourly mastermind call for our members in which we have one focus, and that is to study how successful people behave. And it turns out that truly successful people do pretty much the same things. There is a formula. And we study this together with my Top Practices members month after month. Dave is funny, very creative, and he's a lifelong student who loves to share what he learns. You're going to enjoy the next 40 minutes, I promise. Here now, Dave Fries. Okay, well, welcome, Dave Fries, my buddy. How are you, sir?
Good, and I'm especially excited to be here. This is fantastic.
You know, and I had said to you before we started, and I told you we weren't allowed to tell anybody this, but I'm really especially excited to do this with you because, I don't know, Dave and I have a monthly Top Practices event we call the Mindset Call, where we really just have discussed over years now, just in depth, what makes successful people successful. And we're very operational about it. We're really trying to teach and trying to learn. Today's a very different take on all of this. And I love talking to you, Dave. I love working with you. I love being your friend. And I really want to talk about prosperity with you. So thanks for doing this.
Thank you. And thank you for having me on that call you referenced. I always know that I have a true friend and intellectual fellow traveler when we have as much fun, when we totally agree, as when we disagree about something. We may even have more fun when we disagree.
Well, I think people get more out of it because, it's wonderful, and I like that. I mean, we're pretty congruent in our point of view, but it's been great. So, hey, let's just jump into this, my friend. Sound good?
I'm excited and ready.
Dave, I'm going to ask you a simple question, and that is, how do you define prosperity for you?
So, definitely involves happiness. And for me, happiness comes when I can do what I want to do, when I want to do it, and with whom I want to do it. I like not being beholden, so that I like having enough wealth that I am voluntarily interdependent with other people in my community. I'm not codependent. I like prosperity definitely means that I can travel. And weirdly, prosperity to me a lot of times means simplicity, having achieved a level of simplicity where money goes a lot longer. It goes further.
Okay, so that's pretty cool. Now, interdependent versus codependent, you're using terms there. They ring bells with me, but could you dig into that just a little bit more? Because I think you're saying something important there, and I'd like to put some meat on those bones.
Sure. These may be words that I'm not using correctly. I can only tell you what they mean to me, which is having prosperity means that I can choose to become involved with people on projects where we share some financial responsibility or that we're offering a benefit to our community. And I can make that choice to become involved and where we're depending on one another, but I'm not forced to be dependent on someone else. I think, like, for example, Rem, this is, for me, one of the sources of the strength of my marriage. We make one another better and stronger and more creative as people than if we were individually traveling through life. But we're not codependent. We don't totally rely on one another. She could travel and teach, and I could travel and teach, and we're there for one another. So that is definitely at the heart of my concept of prosperity.
Well, that's great. That term interdependent rang some bells for me because Stephen Covey uses that, his 7 habits of highly effective people,
Mm-hmm.
going from independent to interdependent and how important that is. So that's just sort of brought that up. And, the other thing is I do know and have always admired and have you as a role model in some ways for your true love of and commitment to travel and how you've integrated that into your life. I mean, when we all travel, we all try to take vacations, but you've been pretty intentional about it with your family and the way you do it.
Yeah, I mean, it even affected my choice of job and what I decided to do. So once I decided that I want to become an attorney, I knew there were only certain types of law where that would even be possible. If you're a trial lawyer, that judge calls you to court, you got to be there. So I really chose my job and chose the way I was going to, the type of practice and the setting in which I was going to practice and how I staffed the practice to permit me to do what I did, which was to take month to 6 week long trips with the kids, alternating years, 1 year in America, 1 year overseas, 1 year in America, 1 year overseas. So it was very intentional.
Yeah, and I've been watching you do it. Well, okay, so that brings us to really the second question, which is what is the defining moment or event that brought you to your career path? A little bit about your story.
Well, it's actually very clear for me. Whenever anybody asks me this, the same image always comes to my mind. And it was when I was selected as an exchange student and I was given a little bit of a choice where to go. And I said, okay, I'll go to Latin America or Spain. And in that case, my idea was to focus on developing fluency in a second language, or I wanted to go to England or Australia. And there, my idea was to really focus on the history of either Australia or the UK. And I ended up getting assigned to New Zealand, which everybody knows where New Zealand is now. But back then, no one knew. I just had this fabulous time. It gave me a chance to reinvent myself. It gave me a chance to think about who I was and who I wanted to be. It really was a turning point for me. And I could trace back directly to that when I decided to pursue the 2 aspects of my job. One is writing and thinking and coaching and training people. And the other is as an attorney, where I'm empowering people to leave a legacy to their family in the way that they want to.
And, I know how much you try to educate, mentor, and be a teacher to the attorneys in your firm, to the people that you work with. But, ever since I've met you, and, we met so long ago at a mastermind meeting that Ben Glass and Mike Capuzzi had put together. And I was one of the posse that Ben Glass brought, along with Tom Foster, Bob Battle. And you were in Capuzzi mastermind posse along with Jim Palmer. I'm not really sure if I recall who else right now. It was that original one. But we're going around the room. Big story about you is tell us something about you that no one, we wouldn't normally know. And of course, you're the one that said,
I've been waterboarded.
I'm probably the only person at this table that's been waterboarded.
I
And we all
remember
looked
that
at each
moment.
other. Yeah. And we all thought, I think maybe this could get dangerous or whatever. It was,
People did move away from me. Yeah.
yeah, everybody did. Yeah. But you'd had some experience. I think you were working negotiation and stuff with the U.S. government. You never told us much about it, but something like that. What's it called? Very confidential client. That's who it is, right?
Yes, that's true. I never worked. People always think I worked for the CIA, but I never worked directly for the CIA.
Right. And that's what people who work for the CIA always say, right?
That's the problem with telling the truth, is that gets misinterpreted, right? But
Yeah, right. I
but
neither
no,
confirm nor deny. Yeah, exactly. That whole thing. But also, Dave, but even at that time, and why I bring this up is you've been very entrepreneurial yourself outside of the law practice. You've always been really involved in, again, teaching and coaching and supporting people in that way. I mean, that's a value that you just hold, and you've turned that
Mhm.
into so many different things that I've watched you do over the years.
Yeah. I mean, when I was in law school, so I'm going to an Ivy League law school, I got a job. I was appointed by the Supreme Court of the state of Pennsylvania, and I was assigned to this massive mass murder trial. So I had a job, I was married, I was rehabbing a house, and Robin and I created a business which we sold when we moved out of Philadelphia. So I really did learn how to manage my time extremely well, and how the enthusiasm of having clarity about what was important to you helped with managing the time, because you really had to have clarity and alignment, and you had to have energy. And that was a skill set that lasted me through my whole life, as were the skills that I learned when I first learned interrogation. And my bosses became aware that I was good at being influential with people and finding out what they really needed. And that was a prized skill in that other world in which I worked that served me really well in understanding how to market the businesses that I created or advised, and my own practice to people, because I became a really powerful, good, active, influential listener. And I really came to understand how to listen to people, and how to understand what worried them, and how to understand what delighted them, and how to get at the actual language that they use to describe things. So that made me good at lots of other things.
Well, and you've been such a student of marketing, such a student of, success, as you say, success technologies. And it's just fun to be on this long journey now that you and I've been on together as we share this. So Dave, let me ask you, this is, I think, really helpful for folks. We all have challenges. We all have obstacles that we face. Every single one of us. What can you share that helps you on your daily journey to deal with things? What can trip you up, and how do you deal with it?
So I have this theory, and this is going to be a long-winded, almost Tom Foster-esque answer to your question, but
Take your time.
if you could see video of me, I think, and nobody else could see that, but this is a very discreet scar. And I was paralyzed from the neck down for a while, and went through 3 years of rehab to get back to where I was, well, or to get to where I could be. And I have this theory that the greatest generation, when they came back from World War II, made these amazing changes in the economy of the United States that just kind of exploded at that time, because they had seen so many horrible things and had lost so many friends, and they had experienced real risk and danger, and had been pulled out of their hometowns and trained briefly as soldiers and then thrown into the war. And then when they came back and they were assessing business risk, they said, really, business risk is I might lose this stuff? Nobody gets killed? Fine, count me in. And so there was a level of courageousness, because the risk by comparison was not frightening to them because of the experiences they've been through. And when I was in my 30s, for all kinds of reasons that I don't usually discuss, I never really thought I would live much beyond that. And so when I did, I was delighted by that. And then when I sustained this potentially life-ending, crippling injury and was able to come back, again, I just looked at other risks and other stresses that are ordinarily the things that trip us up and make life difficult. I just looked at those in a different way. And I'm not here to say that I'm not bothered by the daily difficulties of failed communication, when you think you've been clear with somebody and they come back, or they forget, or they listen to you telling them what to do and they don't take any notes and then they goof it up. Like, all of those things bug me at some level. Our famed brother over in your other world of podiatry, Peter Wishney, once heard me complaining that I was having to do training with people over and over again. He said, why are you complaining about that? It's just true. You just have to do it. So just do it and stop complaining about it. I thought, geez, he's absolutely right about that. So I think that, one, I've taken these experiences, and they're going to be different for everybody. And I've said to myself, look, there are horrible things that can happen. So when little things happen, let's not let them derail us. So that is the first thing. And then the other thing is, I've had to practice this, because most people don't know this about me. They think I'm super easygoing, but I feel like life is short and I've got to pack a lot in. So I could be very demanding of myself and other people. And so I've had to learn to catch myself much earlier when I'm becoming agitated or heading toward from peacefulness toward anger, because it's easy to tilt over to the point where you start saying things and doing things out of anger that you'll later regret. And so that for me is the thing I've had to work on. And for me, the superpower has been that I had these experiences that make me feel like the day-to-day stressors, the day-to-day things that go wrong, I've just put them in context that they, most of the time I can't remember. I used to tell people 5 years from now, you won't remember what they are. I'm at a point in my life, either because of depth of experience or failing memory, where I can't remember the stuff that went wrong yesterday. And so, what's the point? I don't have to wait 5 years to forget it. So that's been a life's journey for me, getting better and better at not going as fast from peacefulness and self-awareness to anger, where I lose that self-awareness, or agitation or anxiety. That's another thing. People who are really good thinkers and problem solvers often are able to cook up all manner of horrible scenarios and possibilities, and therefore they have a constant sense of dread and foreboding. I'm easily able to tilt into that as well, and that could trip you up. So for me, it's become a journey of becoming aware of those things earlier and sooner, when it's easier to interrupt them before they take control.
I really share that. I haven't had an experience like what you dealt with the accident, but I can definitely, if I'm not careful and vigilant and don't work on it, I can game out all the stuff and focus on. That's why I spend so much time focusing on the positive and the light, because, I have a natural ability and tendency to say, yeah, but this could go wrong. This could go wrong. And I still do that, because you need to, you and I both, we've talked about this before. We're both trying to figure out, well, what's the worst? What about this? I mean, that's just being smart. I'll just say one quick thing about that. I'm interviewing my father right now. It came up because when I was looking up pandemic and quarantine, and I was just thinking about those words, they harkened back to what pops up in Google searches is the polio epidemic in the United States specifically, that started in the 1920s and didn't really end till Jonas Salk had the vaccine in the early 1950s. And my dad got polio at age 7 in 1941. And I was just asking him about the experience and quarantine and all the rest of it. And I planned to interview his brother, who's only 18 months younger than him. And Dad said one thing to me that I've never heard him say. I don't even know how much we've ever really discussed this. But he said about contracting polio at age 7. That was the best thing that ever happened to me.
Wow.
I know. That's what I said. What? Wow. Because he feels that he has a size 7 foot and he has a size 11 foot. His left foot's 7, his right foot's 11. He says, yeah, that drove me. That caused me to know that I had to be strong. I could get through anything. And he was really articulate about it. It was really just, to me, just remarkable to hear him say that. He went on to play. He was, again, he's got a pronounced limp. He was a defensive tackle on the football team and apparently quite good, and a heavyweight wrestler. By the way, his left leg, and I was going to say his bad leg, he also said to me, he says, I don't call that leg my bad leg anymore. He said, that leg has carried me with everything that happened 76 years or whatever it is. He says, that's my hero leg. That's just great. It's just great to think like that. So listen, what's the top strategy? I mean, you are the man I go to for strategies. What's the top strategy you use just to keep you heading in the right direction and not slipping back into those old habits or patterns?
So I have a framework. So you would think one good strategy would be enough, but I have a little framework that helps me with this, because I would slip back into my bad habits, and it takes this whole build out that I'm about to describe to you to keep me from doing it. But this is foolproof for me, or pretty foolproof. And people listening can use this in its entirety, or could pick and choose things that are appealing to them or could help them. So I have this framework where I have meta strategy, which is very high level mindset, which require me to get clarity about my purpose and my values and the mission specifically being the project that I'm working on and how we measure its progress and things like that. At the meta level, I'm constantly seeking to make sure that my purpose, my value, my mission, the strategies and the tactics that I'm going to describe later are in alignment with that clarity. At the meta level, I'm constantly doing things to cultivate and to maintain and to improve my resilience because it is tested all the time. I really have become very skilled at looking inward and outward. So like, what is this that the person is saying? What's it doing to you inside? And how are they presenting? So when we're looking outward, what's their tone of voice? What are they really saying? Are they congruent in their tone of voice and their facial expression and their body language and things? So I have a way of looking inward and a way of looking outward. And I have a way of looking close, and then I have a way of zooming out. I call this magnifying the power of perspective. So am constantly practicing looking at the same thing from different perspectives and in different scales. And that's very, very, very helpful. So the meta, the mindset, and these big level tools that include things like using leverage, that's the highest level. That helps to guide me in the question you really asked me, which is what are the strategies? And the strategies are tools and systems that I use to help me select the particular tactics, which is where the rubber meets the road. Strategy helps me to take what I'm thinking about. It's an electrochemical reaction in my brain, and to turn it into reality on the ground by speaking to people who will go then do things, or by making myself get up and do things, and then by testing them and optimizing them and changing them and making them the better thing. So meta strategy optimizes my ability to use strategy. Strategy is essentially a system that guides me in deploying tactics. And some of the strategic things that I use is that when I have an idea, I keep going. I don't stop with that idea. I keep going and going and going, because typically the first iteration of the idea is not the best. And often the last one, which is the 100th one or the 50th one, you sort of do know when you're done. And typically the first time I peter out, I know I'm not done and I keep going. But then I go back and I reevaluate. So I have a strategy that I call free, which is I force myself to keep going with ideas. I reserve judgment on them, whether I'm working myself or with somebody else. I then will later go back and evaluate them, and then I enact them. And that last step of that strategy is where I get to like the tactics. How am I going to take this idea and make it work in the real world? And finally, at the strategic level, I also use the OODA loop for optimization. So most people never do this thing. They don't think of ideas. Of the smaller group that thinks of ideas, they implement the first one. Of the group that brainstorms and goes further, they typically give up too soon. Of the group that really brainstorms, it gets out there and finds the really good idea, they often implement, and that's it. And it either fails or it succeeds, but there's no further effort to optimize or improve it, which I always do. And I use another strategy of mine, which is time blocking, so that when I have an idea, I put down the time to work on it, and then I put down the time to implement it, and then I put down the time to go back and optimize it, see if it worked and should be abandoned or should be improved in some way. And on those things guide the last level that I mentioned, which is tactical, which is what are the things that I do? And you know, Rem, because you've seen me do this and teach this, that I'm pretty good at getting people to come up with tactical ways of taking their ideas and turning them into reality. And you and I could go all day talking about that, and I love it. But you asked me about the strategy. I couldn't resist talking about these other two, which is the meta level, then the strategy, which guides my decisions about the tactical. Are they ultimately in alignment with the clarity I have of my purpose, values, and mission?
Dave, you used the term OODA loop, which to you is just second nature now. Could you spend just maybe 1 minute, just define that for everybody? And
yeah, sure. And you just did something that is brilliant, and I can't let it go without mentioning it, which is that we often say things that because of our particular expertise, or even not our expertise, but our internal experience, we think that the person receiving our communication understands it in the same way, but they don't. And so you've asked me to explain something that I just took for granted there. And the OODA loop is a idea of Colonel Boyd. So let's give credit where credit is due, who was training high-level fighter pilots to fight MiG pilots in aerial battle. And OODA loop was a process of sort of changing, recognizing that the battlescape was changing. So it was observe, orient, decide, act. And so you would see what was going on. You would see what your options were, determine what your options were. You would decide which one to take, and then you would act. that then changes the battle space and would force, in this case, the MiG pilot to do something to evade you, depending on what you were doing. And I use it in business as a way of going back. If I put out an ad, I want to go back at the simplest level and see, did that ad bring in prospect? But we need to go deeper. Did it bring in the right kind of prospects, or did it bring in people that were difficult to deal with? Did it bring in prospects that were hard to convert or easy to convert? And so we took an action, we observed, we oriented, figured out which one to take, we decided which one to take, we acted, and now we're going to go back and repeat that again and repeat that again and repeat that again as a tool of optimizing. And I should say also that a guiding strategic goal is to reach informed simplicity. And so typically when we start off with a business or we start off in life with a new enterprise of some kind or another, it's simple because we haven't done much yet. And then we do a lot, it becomes more complicated. And then ultimately we have to get to the point, and the OODA loop and optimizing thinking helps with this, which is that we want to go back and say, okay, we've created this complex, sprawling machine. And the earlier we do this, the more often we do it, the better. What of it is serving no really useful purpose, or maybe detrimental, or maybe weighing the system down? And what can we eliminate? So it's not just that we're mindlessly searching for simplicity. We're searching for an informed simplicity, that we've pared back what we experimented with, but which we no longer need or doesn't really add anything and may actually be detracting.
Thank you, buddy, because I know how important that is. And you've taught that to me. I had never heard of it until I learned it from you. So moving along, the people listening to this podcast are interested in achieving their own version of prosperity. And do you have any advice for them?
Yes. It's my nature to have to stop myself from giving advice, by the way. I found that people were much more likely to do things when they came upon it or discovered it on their own. So I became expert at leading people to ideas that they could experiment with. But I mentioned a couple of things in that last answer that for me, at least, were transformational. And so there are good odds that they may be for other people as well. One of the things I mentioned was that I am meticulous about blocking time. And through the years, I went from blocking time to do things myself to blocking time to do things myself, but also to delegate things, to then realizing that sometimes goes off the rails. So I block time to do things myself, to delegate things, to follow up on my delegation. And then I blocked time to become better at hiring and better at training, so that I was picking leaders so that there didn't have to be as much time to do the follow-up on delegation. And then there was a breakthrough. And you and I think, had this breakthrough at a sort of similar point in our lives, where we started to think at a higher level, and we realized we needed the time for that. So this was the working on the business rather than in the business distinction, is the way that lots of people express this. And oh my God, what a difference that made. But I was religious about blocking the time to do it and then not allowing people to interfere with it. And I noticed that a lot of people would say, oh, I do that. But at the slightest provocation, they would give up the time and they would go back to answering a client's call or a patient's call, or taking a complaint from a member of their team, or doing advertising, which at one level, I guess, is working on the business, but another, it's just a thing that has to be done. And so I became clear that I had to be religious about blocking this time. And then as time went on, and I think it was really Perry Marshall, who's a friend of mine and who got me thinking about this, probably 10 years ago. And he called it Renaissance time, which was time for me largely when I traveled, but there were times during each week when it was, I just wanted to read a book. There didn't have to be an immediate payoff to the business. I just wanted to ride a bike, or to train more in martial arts, and to do these things that were important to me. And what's interesting about that is when you find that you can create the time in your life to work on the business rather than in the business, and then you give that next step and work on your mind and to start thinking at a much higher level, magical things start to happen. Your influence grows. The areas in which you are able to help other people grow. The magnitude of the projects and the problems you're able to work on and solve changes dramatically. And you begin to associate with other people who think and work at these higher levels. As you know, I have lunch with Steve Forbes, the editor-in-chief of Forbes magazine, several times a year. I'm thinking and working and doing when I'm with people that are thinking, working, and doing at that level in a totally different way. So how do you get there? It's the simple task of being super controlling about your calendar. I tend to put all of these things in two places. They ultimately all end up, and all the time blocking is done in my Outlook calendar. But as you know, I carry a pen and I carry these little 3x5 cards clipped together with a clip so that I can capture ideas, I can capture things, because I've found that putting time blocks in on the phone means that if the phone doesn't sync to the Outlook calendar, problems arise. So I actually do it, and I let somebody who's sitting on the network add that to my calendar. I'm blessed to be able to have people that help me to do that. But the key thing is to carry something with you, whether it's the phone or an iPad or whatever you use electronically or analog, that lets you capture ideas and to remind yourself of all these things that have to be done. And then to get them into a calendar where you can control it. But it's no longer just working in the practice or on the practice. It's at a higher level, working on myself as a human being, allowing time merely to think about things at a totally different level. And the weird thing about that is that by not demanding that it have any immediate return on investment in the business, it shockingly has that effect with an astonishing frequency, or in some other aspect of my financial life. It's just shocking how I was thinking, and I had an insight, and I felt like, gee, we're, for a variety of reasons, I believe we're at the peak of this commercial real estate market. And I suddenly, probably because of the reticular activating system, found that I had lots of opportunities to sell some commercial real estate that I owned. And so it created massive liquidity for me at a time when I had decided that that might be important and I might need to diversify some investments. So working on the brain and what you're paying attention to and what you want to achieve at a bigger level, good Lord, that changes the whole game. But it relies on something simple like blocking the time to do it.
Time blocking, to me, I know you were talking about a lot more, but it's still the number one habit that correlates to success and really enhancing what you can accomplish.
Yeah, nothing gets done without it. So,
right. No one does. No one ever does. I want to ask you this one. We haven't talked about this. This is one of my favorite questions. I've been enjoying it. If you were a toy, any toy at all, what would it be and why?
I love that you love this. I struggled with it because at first, when you asked me about a toy, you gave me a heads up that you were going to ask this. I probably shouldn't reveal that, but I'm glad you did, because at first, my first answer was going to be that I should be a toy gun, because there's this sort of element of lurking violence beneath the quiet exterior. But that's too open to misinterpretation. I mean, there were reasons why I thought a toy gun might make sense. But as I really let that percolate in, I felt like I should be either a paint set or a set of Crayola crayons, because that would, as a toy, would allow people to let loose their creative function. And that is one of the things that I do in life. It is true that I've also waved guns around, and it's true that people have shot at me. So the gun is not without its validity. But I do think a better metaphorical toy for me is to be Crayola crayons.
I love that. That's great. That's the way I see you, helping others really paint and create that. And by the way, I want to apologize one more time for shooting that gun at you. It wasn't nice of me to do.
Well, it was from far away. It was understandable.
Yeah, right. I thought, yeah, right, exactly. Just to be clear, folks, that did not happen. I'm just joking. Dave, this is going to be tough for you. It's tough for everybody. But if you could recommend one great book we should all be reading, what would it be?
Okay, so just one, because I had three. But if you're going to make me do one, it's clear to me. So it's whatever book enhances your personal spiritual practice. So I was raised in the Lutheran Church, like the Christian tradition, and I find comfort in lots of different religious traditions. So for me, I mean, I could go back and read from the Bible. I could read from any number of spiritual guides and take from them things that would help me to be a better person in these very trying times. But it's whatever your spiritual tradition is. And if you say, I'm not spiritual, that may be worth working on. Pick one then and read it. I do have two other practical ones, but I think
Go for it.
Okay, so I'm going to break the rules. This is not totally unrelated. So in a big picture, improving human relationships, The Coaching Habit is a short, excellent book that just gives people real world techniques they can use to become massively better communicators, to develop massively better relationships. And then on the marketing, business building side, if you want a book that probably nobody's ever told you to read before, read 7 Steps to Freedom by Suarez. Not something that it's probably not even in print anymore, but if you get your hands on a copy, it's fascinating.
Wow. Those are great. That's good. Who's the author of The Coaching Habit? Do you know off the top of your head?
Michael Bungay, Bungay, Stainer, Staner. This little tiny book, and it's probably got 2 or 3 little things you could do, but it would be fundamentally transformational to how good you are at human communication.
Dave, just enjoyed this time. I've been looking forward to it, as I said, and the stories with Dave are endless. If you ever are in his presence at a meeting, you got to find him after hours and sit around in the lobby or wherever it is, because you will be not only informed, but deeply entertained, as I have been the entire time I've known you. So, my friend, thank you for coming onto this podcast. And, you and I'll be talking very soon on our regular mindset call that we do, all about some of the insights that we both had and what we've seen other people learn from this period that we're in with COVID-19. So I'm looking forward to that too. But hey, enjoy the grandchildren, enjoy the beautiful day. And thank you for sharing your thoughts on prosperity with me, my friend.
Rem, thank you for having me, and thank you for doing this. The idea of helping people to achieve prosperity and something greater, just this idea that whatever we think is the best, there's something beyond that, is so fascinating and powerful. I love you for it. I love you for having me as a team member on that call with you. And I feel a little guilty because you and I sometimes, I think, get more out of that call than anybody else just by preparing for it. So
we always confess that that's the case. Always do. And it's so interesting. The name of the podcast, Prosperity and Something Greater, is so influenced by you, because you're always like, what's that goal? I'm going to accomplish this or more or sooner. Listen, I have a paper that's always with me, and up at the top, it always says or more or sooner. And I learned that anytime you write a goal. All right, Dave. Thank you, buddy. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Prosperity, flourishing and thriving, freedom, making choices that serve you and fund your ideal lifestyle through service to others, living a fulsome life and leaving nothing on the table, knowing that you always can and need to learn more, choosing prosperity each and every day, yet another glimpse of something even greater. Let me know what you think. You can send me an email at rem@toppractices.com. Prosperity is the entire focus of Top Practices. Most doctors are struggling with the business of medicine, and those that aren't truly understand that through association with other successful practitioners, they can take their success to the next level or something greater like prosperity. Prosperity in business is a function of mindset, marketing, and management. And that is our mission at Top Practices. You can find out more about Top Practices, our marketing and management programs for doctors, our workshops and annual summit at toppractices.com. Until next time, this is Rem Jackson. Smile when you wake up, and then have a really great day. Nothing is more important